MAGA Republicans in Georgia are trying to make it easier to delay or refuse the certification of election results. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
So after Donald Trump praised 3 Republican members on the Georgia State Election Board, calling them at his rally pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory, those same 3 members approved a rule to effectively make it easier to delay certification of election results. What exactly is the rule that they approved, and what is the effect you think it'll have?
Look, Sophie, we've talked about this before. What the Republican plan is to make the certification process. This is where you take the unofficial results and make them the official results, to make that process discretionary rather than mandatory. So you're going to hear these terms a lot about ministerial duties versus discretionary acts. And what this all means is that in Georgia, this MAGA controlled state election board, which is like this obscure body that is supposed to make fair rules, but is under the control of Trump blessed officials. They are trying to create wiggle room for county officials who are election deniers to say, you know what? I'm not sure that I think that the candidate who got 800 votes got more votes than the person who got 700 votes. So I'm not going to certify that. I want to do an investigation. I want to get more documentation. I don't agree that these numbers say what they mean. And so this is what they are trying to do in Georgia. It is what they are trying to do around the country. It's getting less attention than in Georgia, but everybody needs to pay attention to this, because this is how they are going to try to gum up the works in 2024.
Let's take a step back for a second. So we're talking about kind of the minutia of what goes on in election certification. What exactly is election certification? What is the purpose of this process? And can election officials simply refuse to participate in certifying election results?
Of course they can't refuse to certify election results. Like, it's literally like you had one job, right? Your one job was to take, if you're on the certification board, it's called different things, different places. But if you're on that certification board, your one job are to take the results from the precincts, put them onto a document. Okay, make sure that there are no uncounted ballots, like provisional ballots, that those get added into the total, that there's no, that if people have cured ballots, those get added into the total. And then you add up the numbers. If we came up with a system today, you know what we would call the certifiers of election? Microsoft Excel, right? This is an old process where people did this hand math, and it became part of the pageantry of our democracy. People congratulated themselves across the aisle on a job well done. But what the Republicans are trying to do is to insert into that arithmetic process. Their job is not to be players on the field. Their job is to be the scoreboard operator. Someone scores and they put it up on the scoreboard. but they are trying to weaponize that to give Republicans an advantage. But here's, Sophie, what I'm going to tell them. It's not going to work. You've tried this before, you got sued, and you lost. And if you try it again, you're going to get sued and you're going to lose.
Mark, in one of your many pieces about this topic on Democracy Docket, you wrote the following: from experience, we know 2 things about Donald Trump. He's completely transactional, and there was always another transaction. He didn't give a verbal seal of approval to the 3 Georgia State Election Board members simply to gain advantage in a single new rule. So what do you think is next here? What is Trump's larger goal with this whole election certification operation?
Yeah, look, I think that Donald Trump expects that he's going to win these states by whatever means necessary. I think Donald Trump is happy to get a rule that gives some wiggle room here and there, but Donald Trump is after a result. He's not after a process. Donald Trump, this is where I think people underestimate him. He is not interested in just rigging the rules. He is interested in rigging the outcomes. And until people accept that, they fail to understand just how far Donald Trump will go and how much loyalty he will expect along the way. So, in 2020, he wanted the rules rigged before the election to make it harder to vote by mail in the middle of a pandemic. When that failed, he expected loyalty from people certifying election results in places like Wayne County, Michigan, and at the state board. And when that failed, when he was unable to tamper with that, he expected loyalty in having state legislatures disregard the will of the voters and simply try to pass their own electors. When that failed, he tried a fake elector scheme. When that failed, he tried to get the courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, to intervene. And when that failed, Sophie, he instigated a violent insurrection in the nation's capital on January 6th. Donald Trump knows no bounds, and loyalty will get you nowhere if you're a Republican with him. He expects absolute loyalty from Republicans and delivers none in return. So what is the next step for Donald Trump? He's going to want every rule rigged in his favor. When those fail, he's going to want the results rigged in his favor. When those fail, well, we know what happens next.
On a practical level, if some county officials refuse to certify their jurisdiction's election results, what happens then? Can they just get away with it? What happens?
They get sued and they lose. I mean, look, Democracy Docket covered this extensively in 2022. We saw Cochise County, Arizona, try not to certify their election results. And my law firm,
Oh, did we? We have maybe 50 different news alerts on our website just about Cochise County, Arizona.
Yeah, and for good reason. And look, I hope everyone subscribes to Democracy Docket for that very reason, because, you know, you can follow the mainstream media and get a story here, a story there about these issues. But if you really want to stay up to date on what is happening around these issues, you need to subscribe to Democracy Docket. The links are in the show notes and above. But yeah, the reason why Democracy Docket covered this so many times in Arizona with Cochise County is because this was a real threat to the outcome of the elections in Arizona, right? If you don't certify Cochise County, how do you certify the Senate election in 2022? How do you certify the governor's election, the AG election, the Secretary of State election? All elections, by the way, won by Democrats, which may tell you some reason why Cochise County didn't want to certify. They got sued by my law firm and they lost. And then they got indicted by the state because they failed to do their minimum duty. And, you know, my law firm, we had to sue a county in Pennsylvania. And we saw these efforts to refuse to certify around the country. And so that is what Republicans, I think, are planning for 2024. That is what the same outcome will be in 2024 that we saw in 2020 and 2022 if they try it. But, you know, look, it's not to be taken lightly because it does have a disruptive effect on people's confidence in the outcomes, and it can delay things. And obviously in presidential election years, the timetable for certification is much tighter. And so we all need to be prepared. August is a critical month for the state of our democracy. And this Sunday, I will email exclusively to Democracy Docket members my monthly State of Democracy newsletter. Make sure you are upgraded to premium content now to receive it. You can also get a free 2-week trial of all of our premium content. Click on the screen or in the description of the video to sign up.
Like you said, your law firm sued several different county election officials last year for refusing to certify their county's election results. And in the aftermath of the 2020 election, you and your law firm won over 64 lawsuits against Trump when he was trying to overturn the election. What do you anticipate is going to happen this year should Trump lose? How has the legal landscape shifted since 2020 and 2022?
Look, I mean, so good news, bad news. The good news is that I think that more people, including judges, are more skeptical of the nonsense and the shenanigans that Republicans and Donald Trump are planning. You know, people ask me all the time, do you worry about the courts? And I tell them, you know, I always worry about the courts. My job is to worry about everything. But, you know, President Biden has appointed a lot of federal judges. And therefore, you know, the courts have gotten actually markedly better. Even if the Supreme Court is not great, the federal judiciary is actually better than it was in 2020. That said, I think Donald Trump is more desperate. You know, in 2020, he wanted to stay in office. Now he wants to stay out of jail. And, you know, staying out of jail or in prison is a real motivator for most people and certainly for Donald Trump. So I think we need to be prepared that Donald Trump will test the system like it's never been tested before. And, you know, the system is now 4 years later been under attack. Republicans have passed voter suppression laws. They have passed laws to make it easier to cheat after the election, harder to vote before the election, and a lot of good people have left the system. You've seen a lot of good, experienced election officials retire because they are tired of the harassment and the intimidation that they get from Republicans. So, I think that we are in for what is potentially going to be a challenging period, but I have every confidence that the rule of law will again win out. But we cannot assume that there is anything that Donald Trump won't do and that there is any guardrail on him within the Republican Party. The Republican Party, there are no moderates in the Republican Party. There are just proud MAGA members and scared MAGA members. And the proud MAGA members join him in their assault on democracies, on democracy every day. And the scared MAGA hide under the covers. Sometimes they want to seem like they're moderates, but we know what they really are.
This issue of these pro-Trump election officials refusing to certify accurate election results this November has become a growing and massive concern among voters across the country. Over at Democracy Docket, we've gotten dozens of emails, hundreds of comments across all of our social media platforms of voters voicing their concern and asking what they can do to help fight this. So what do you say to that? What can voters actually do to help fight this?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one, protect yourself. Make sure you are registered to vote. Double check it. Even if you've been registered before, I'm telling you, make sure you double check your registration before the deadline in your state to register, to make sure you're registered. Make sure your friends and families do the same thing. Make sure if they're not registered, they do register. Number two, make sure they have a plan to vote. Make sure you know how you're going to vote. The rules of voting have changed in the last 4 years, even in the last 2 years. If you want to vote by mail, that's great. Make sure you understand what you need to do to make sure your ballot is counted. If you want to vote early, perfect. Make sure you know when the early voting takes place and what the locations are. If you want to vote on election day, that's fine too. Just make sure you know where your polling place is. So make sure you have a plan that you are registered and a plan to vote. That's the first most important thing. The second thing is speak out. Don't be timid. This is not a time to assume that someone else is sounding the alarm. Yeah, I do these videos with you, Sophie. We try to, at Democracy Docket, make sure everyone is aware of these issues. But every citizen who cares about democracy has a role to play here. Speak out on social media, in your town square. Go out and say it is not okay that Republicans are trying to suppress the vote. It is not okay that Republicans are going to try to subvert elections afterwards. Tell your friends, your families, your customers, your clients. Talk about it at your family dinner. Talk about it at the local diner. Say it to your knitting club, your bridge club. Talk about the importance of these issues, because if we are all attentive to them and we all speak out as a community, it goes a long way towards preventing this stuff from happening in the shadows. The election deniers want you to be cynical and they want you to not pay attention. Be hopeful and pay attention. And if we all do that, I think it'll be okay. Thanks for joining this episode of Democracy Docket. Please make sure you're subscribed to our free daily and weekly newsletters. The link is in the show notes below.